Time now for our review of some newspaper headlines from around the world. The New York Times leads with our main story that hackers with close links to Russian intelligence agencies are targeting Western organisations that are working to develop coronavirus vaccines. Here in the UK, many papers, including The Guardian, are covering the news of Shamima Begum. She was labelled Daesh bride and stripped of her British citizenship, but judges say she should be allowed to return to the UK to fight the decision. Opinion polls like these in the Financial Times show Donald Trump falling further behind his Democrat challenger, Joe Biden. Polls have been known to be wrong, but many are saying the US president is in electoral trouble. And finally, Le Figaro reports that Catholic worshippers won't have to miss out on the Lourdes pilgrimage in southern France this year, as they will be hosting an e-pilgrimage. And with us to review all these stories are French journalist and commentator Nabila Ramdani and broadcaster Ryan Chilcote. Thank you very much indeed both for being with us on the programme today. So let me start with our main story today, which is that the UK, US and Canadian organisations are allegedly being targeted by Russian state-sponsored hackers. Ryan, let me start with you. How unusual is something like this, a kind of hack like this?
The intelligence services of the United States, the UK, and, less occasionally Canada have been accusing Russia of cyber espionage for a good long while, most notably in the United States with the presidential election and the hacking of the DNC. And in fact, the National Security Agency is saying that it is the very same hacking groups that hacked the DNC, according to today's news, back in 2016, that are behind this quite expansive effort to steal information from coronavirus researchers in the three countries, in the US, the UK, and Canada. Pretty extraordinary stuff. Not unusual, but perhaps the first time I've ever heard of a country, if it is true, trying to steal information on a vaccine.
And we should point out, of course, that Russia has denied any involvement in this. Nabila, what do you think this says about the potential value of a vaccine?
The world has spent most of this year rightly fretting about a global health emergency, but we should not forget that all the old threats that were making life so terrifying in the past have not gone away, and Russian hacking is one of these threats. And in recent years, it's been mainly raised around election time, when we saw, for example, Moscow-based hackers said to have been trying and influence democratic votes in countries, like Britain or the US, or indeed in other countries around the world. And I well remember, for example, that the French President Emmanuel Macron was announcing a major Russian hack right at the beginning of his presidency in 2017. Well, now it has to do with health research secrets that the Russians are said to be after. And this makes a lot of sense for thousands of reasons. And if and when anybody does find a vaccine for COVID-19, then this will result in massive benefits and prestige for the country responsible. And of course, Russia will be everything it can to be that country.
Ryan, do you think this is all about prestige for Russia?
More than prestige. We have public health on the line, national economies. I think that's probably more important for the Russians. If you think about it, they've gone through this first wave and took a huge economic hit with the lockdown, on top of the fact that they had a collapse in the oil price, which gives them about half of the revenue in their coffers. So the prospect of a second wave or further waves is just really quite frightening, I think, for the Kremlin. So you can see their motivation in trying to steal information from other researchers, if it's true. And by the way, we should point out that that's what the security agencies are saying, is that they were simply looking to take this information, not sabotage other countries' efforts. But Russia is a country where the coronavirus is still ripping right through the population, 6,000 infections a day. And the Kremlin's got to get a hold on this. In August, that is typically the month when things turn ugly in Russia. You get protests, you get dissent. President Putin's had a pretty free ride so far this year, even pushing through this constitutional amendment that allows him to run for another 20 years to be president of Russia. What he wants to avoid is an economic situation because of lockdowns where the country is in dire shape. And obviously having a vaccine would be a big help in preventing that.
Yeah, and if I
Okay,
may
well, let's
just
move on to. Sorry, please do.
Oh, just very quickly, I think we should be pointing out that the hackers use cheeky names like Cozy Bear, for example, and are clearly highly intelligent. But what we should remember is that they are ultimately exploiting the chaos and horror of a global health emergency while compromising the security of those working in medical health.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I
Well,
mean,
let's move. Sorry, I keep interrupting you. Ryan, go ahead.
no, I mean, there's no question. It's just, I think, remarkable that it's scientists that are being hacked, because obviously we expect defense contractors, people working on new defense technologies to be hacked, government officials, but the idea that scientists, I think that's quite novel, and I think that just demonstrates how extraordinary this pandemic has become, and its resolution, how crucial it has become for the entire world and individual countries, because when the vaccines do come, there's not going to be enough, at least not enough right away, for everybody.
All right, well, let's turn now to our second story, which is the case of the 15-year-old schoolgirl who left the UK for Syria and was eventually stripped of her citizenship and now wants to appeal that decision. And Nabila, this is, of course, a really polarising issue. And we should, of course, say this is not to do with whether she should be allowed back to the UK, but whether she should be allowed to appeal. What's your take on all this?
Well, I think that the Shamima Begum case is a terrifying one, mainly because it involves a reviled terrorist organization, one that has been responsible for absolutely horrific crimes against humanity. ISIS is a despicable organization, and all of us would like to see it disappear, along with all their supporters, past or present. And absolutely nobody wants somebody who may harbor ISIS sympathies living near them. The point of the case, however, is that it is ultimately about a woman who fled to ISIS when she was still a child. And this makes it just as much a story about rehabilitation as it does about punishing terrorist sympathizers. International law is not about emotion or getting angry. It is about solving serious questions according to rational rules, and this includes dealing with people considered a potential threat. Judges and parole boards they regularly have to deal with prison release for convicted rapists, armed robbers, and the like. And the Shamima Begum case should be considered with exactly the same kind of rational thought. And dare I say, Priti Patel, the current British Home Secretary, tends to look at every issue in very simplistic terms. And that's why so many of her attempts to get things done don't work. She has typically adopted an angry and very emotional line on the Shamima Begum case, hoping that the problem will just go away because Begum has been stripped of her citizenship. But judges, as usual, are reflecting the complexity of the world. And at present, they are not saying that Begum can stay in Britain. They are simply saying that she should have a chance to state her case in the UK.
And Ryan, Shamima Begum's circumstances notwithstanding, her case is also something that could potentially be applied to around 100 others. What are the implications of that?
Yeah, 150 to be exact. Look, it feels a little bit like Guantanamo Bay and the decisions around the issues around Guantanamo Bay. And, I, as many journalists, try to be very objective in the way I look at things. But it does seem to me that if we are going to accuse people of things and they are citizens of this country, that we better be prepared to prove them in a court of law. And that's only right. That's the message that democracies and countries that believe in the rule of law should be following. We should be leading from the front, that even people that we think are guilty of despicable crimes have the right to defend themselves in court. If she's a threat to British society, I live in the United Kingdom, I'm in London, then she should be, while she's being tried, she should be remanded. She should be in prison or in jail right? But I don't see why she can't be allowed necessarily back in the country if the prosecutors are so convinced that she indeed was assisting ISIS. Bring it on. Let her come back here. Let her be convicted. Let her be prosecuted. Let her be convicted. Let her be sentenced. And let that be a message to everyone that if you do this kind of thing, you will be brought to justice. And we won't be skirting justice. The country won't look to do that, but it'll look to actually enact that in a just and unwavering and unassailable way.
OK, I want to move over to the United States now, where the latest opinion polls suggest that Joe Biden has opened up a 15-point lead over President Trump, 52 versus 37. Nabila, how accurate do we think this is? Are we going to have a landslide come November?
Well, actually, this lead doesn't surprise me at all. And this is not necessarily because Joe Biden is a great candidate. You know, he's pushing 78 and has been involved in all kinds of controversies. But lots of people are very unhappy in the US right now. And coronavirus has opened up all kinds of negativity, not least of all in the economy, which until now has been viewed as one of Donald Trump's strong points. Business are now going under and many people are losing their jobs. And Trump still earns a passably positive rating for the economy in these new polls, but disastrous ones for handling COVID-19 and issues such as race relations, for example. And I think that if Trump does lose the election, then it will be because of his own failures rather than because of anything particularly impressive about those opposing him. And this is, of course, how he got into the White House in the first place. Many considered him an awful candidate, but people were absolutely sick of Hillary Clinton, and so he became the anti-Hillary winning candidate.
And Ryan, what do you think? Polls have, of course, been wrong before.
Yeah, you know, what I'd give Nabila there is that, in fact, when it comes to the polls, when it comes to this election, it is for President Trump to lose, in the sense that if he does lose this election, it will be his own undoing. I mean, you look at Joe Biden, you know, he really hasn't even been campaigning up until very recently. He was stuck down in his basement, something that President Trump liked to make a lot of fun of. The one thing I would disagree on, however, is the issues that seem to be hurting Donald Trump right now. I think race relations maybe a little bit, but, you know, a lot of the conservative sort of coming from the right issues, those are his base is kind of still really with him on those. It's his handling of the pandemic, I think, that has alarmed even many conservatives. I think, you know, I have a lot of conservatives that I talk to quite regularly, and they've been unimpressed. And then so that's been a big issue. They were worried about it from the very beginning. Now that we have this second wave, or this persisting first wave, you know, it's just still on their minds. The second thing that I would point out with Donald Trump is that many Americans, many conservative Americans, didn't like the idea that he tried to employ the U.S. military in resolving some of those demonstrations that we saw over the last month in the United States. That turned a lot of conservatives off. They thought that was the wrong thing to be doing, and they may now not vote for him, and in some cases may even vote for Joe Biden. Then again, you know, we saw in the last election, Americans don't necessarily say truthfully how they're going to vote. The polls had Hillary winning the last time. She lost miserably. And, well, at least when it comes to the electoral polls. Going back to your article, you know, it shows a pretty clean sweep for Joe Biden, a real big advantage in a lot of the battle states. So we'll have to see. But it's not looking good for Donald Trump right now. A lot can happen in a few months in American politics.
Yeah.
Well, a lot can happen before November, can't it? We just about have time to talk about our last story, which is the world's first e-pilgrimage, they're calling it, at Lourdes in France. Is something like this the future, do you think, Nabila?
Well, I have to say that religious events in France were some of the worst coronavirus spreaders at the beginning of the pandemic. It's actually said to have started in a church in Mulhouse. So the idea of an e-pilgrimage does not surprise me at all. I mean, religious worship is ultimately all about love and community, and that means people getting very close indeed. But, you know, the conditions aren't safe at the moment, so it can't happen. And an artificial version of a pilgrimage is the best way forward. And it's not just religion situation that is compromised, of course. We see parliament meetings and even football matches being played well away from people. So why not religious events? I mean, Lourdes has been very good at adapting to changing events over the years. And this is a very sensible step, in my view. I would just say, let's just pray that it's just a temporary measure, however, and that we all can get back to being together in the very near future.
And what do you think, Ryan? Does an e-pilgrimage work for you, the idea of that?
Well, it might work, but look, it's a Band-Aid and it's going to go away. The whole idea of a pilgrimage is it's a visceral experience, right? You go out, it's palpable. You go to a place that has significance, a physical place that has significance to your faith. You interact with people that share that same faith. I don't see how you replace that with an e-experience. We've all spent plenty of time now. We're chatting from my home studio. We're all looking for this pandemic to end, the vaccines to arrive. And I think in 2 years' time, we'll see that very few people are doing e-pilgrimages. They're back to the same thing. The Hajj will be on, Christian pilgrims will be moving, because that's how they manifest in the physical world their faith.
Well, interesting times we live in, certainly. Thank you very much indeed for joining us for Behind the Headlines. French journalist and commentator Nabila Ramdani and broadcaster Ryan Shelkite.